Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. I wanted first to thank Carla Christensen, but I thought she would be here. She is Carla's here? Oh, there you are. Yes. I wanted to thank Carla and let you know that she's the reason I'm here. She invited me here to speak well over 16 years ago. But there were two other people that were helpful in keeping me here. One was Phil Elliott. We became techno buddies and Star Trek fans. And then there was Wayne Johnson. And I'd like to tell you about Wayne. But before I do, I'd like to tell you this. It's kind of a disclaimer. I'm going to be telling you some stories. They're personal stories. They're my stories. And even though they touch on the Black community, I want you to understand I do not speak for that community. Wayne was the guy, if I remember well, didn't he design the timers for the discussion group, if you want to know how cool that guy was? My first bike week here, Wayne pulled me aside because he was a biker also, and he said, hey Mel, have you been to this place called the White Eagle outside of Bunnell? And I said, yeah. And he said, have you noticed the vendors in the back? This place was kind of huge. It had almost an acre in the back, and they would put vendors back there, and it was like their own little fair. And I said, yeah, I had been there. And he says, so then you've seen the merchandise, that it's all racial, it's white supremacist, and it's Nazi. I said, yeah, I saw that. He said, what are you going to do about it? What am I going to do about it? I said, I'm not going to do anything about it. He says, well, if you don't do anything about it, I will. Later, I found out that he went to the News Journal, showed him what was going on. The News Journal wrote a story on it. Next thing I knew, that someone had written it, the Attorney General, and vendors were told that that material was no longer to be sold or on display. Wayne taught me the power of an individual. And that was one of the things that let me be here, that power of being me. And you say, well, what's so big about that? Well, you don't know my culture, my life. People don't understand that there were times when I can't speak out. I remember when we were traveling in Philadelphia, when we would go to Atlantic City, my mother had to pack all we were going to eat, all we were going to have, because we weren't going to be able to stop along the way to get anything. So I realized that there were times when I could not speak up for myself. But at this point, even though all of that Wayne has done has happened, I'd like to show you the first slide, please. That 2-3 years ago, I took this picture at Bike Week. At the bottom, it says, it's a White House. Every day I deal with this in one way or another. That doesn't mean it's totally negative, but I don't think everyone understands what's going on. The next slide, please. Not everyone is always as welcoming as Wayne was. This gentleman here, I always thought he was Willie Nelson, but he was at one of the other bars. I guess you're going to see that I like biker bars, and he was at one of the biker bars, and I walked in and he wouldn't even speak to me the first couple times, maybe a week or two when I walked in. Maybe a month later, he stopped me and he says, hey, I don't have any money, buy me a beer. I bought him a beer. And I started to walk away. He says, no, 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 sit down since you bought the beer. You know, we became close friends. I learned that he was what he called himself a backwoods Georgia boy, whatever that is. And our friendship grew until one day he said, you know, Mel, I don't like colored people, but I like you. He said, if you need be, you knock on my door. There's always a place for you at my table. You think that I should be happy, but it really hurt. He wouldn't accept my mother, my daughters, my dad. Maybe it's because we grow up in a world where we don't fully understand what we're saying and seeing. For instance, that dark chocolate cake, real dark, what you call that? Devil's food cake, right? But that white fluffy cake we call angel food cake. And we think nothing of that. If you get thrown out of an organization, you've been blackballed. If you can't get in, you're on the blacklist. If one of the governments are running a military situation that they don't want anyone to know about it, they call it black ops. You can see where there is this aura that hangs around. But it works both ways, folks. I'm not the only one. I was thinking about that, and I thought about my friends that are Jewish. Have you ever used the term Jew someone down? You don't even think too much of it, do you? Or how about the Indian giver? It's part of our culture. And then when people stand up and say something, we get upset because I think you're uncomfortable. And I can respect that. You see, a friend of mine, when I told him I was going to be here speaking, he said, you know, Mel, back when I was a young man, we had a black maid, and she dressed me up one day, and she took me off to her community. I must have been about 8 or 9 years old. And he said, even then, I felt uncomfortable being the only little white kid. It reminded me of my boss when he invited me to go to Tuskegee University. We were invited down there to help the seniors with their interviewing skills. And we were walking across the campus, and he said to me, you know, Mel, for the last 3 days, I have never been treated so well. I've never eaten so well. He said, but I am so uncomfortable being the only white person on this campus. I said, welcome to my world. I was living in Minnesota. Not all things come that way. And what I mean is some of those things are just part of our culture. Things kind of jump up sometime. I remember when I was in high school, I went out for the swim team. And a couple of the seniors, the varsity swimmers came up, and they were very nice. They asked me who I was, what was I going to swim. I told them I was going to swim the butterfly. And they kind of looked at each other and they said, you can't swim the butterfly. I can't? I said, no. I said, why can't I? I thought there was some rule. They said, well, no, black people are built different in their chest, and they can't bring their arms around to do that stroke. Little did he know that for 5 or 6 years, I had been going to the local YMCA where I had instructions for swimming and what they call minnow, when you just start out, to going up to a shark, which I was. And at that time, you had to be proficient in 4 different strokes: the regular freestyle, the backstroke, the breaststroke, and the butterfly. I swam 40-meter butterfly. Mom had warned me about things like that. You know that talk they tell you about when as a young man you're going out, they don't want you to get in trouble with the police. It's not only that. I'll just give you one other example. We're taught that when you go in a store, when you buy something, you get a receipt and you get a bag. That way there's no question when you get to the door that you bought it. And I'm gonna tell you now, I've had that situation more than once. This one just popped into my mind. I remember when I was working with IBM, I was making good money, and I went out to buy a new car, and I walked into a showroom, and the salesman walked up to me and he said, "Do you have a job?" I'll never forget that. His thing was, this black guy walking in to buy a new car, who did he think he was? Could we have that next, the one with the swimmer? The swimmer's up here, okay. You gotta forgive me, I get into this thing and I'm off. Well, things are changing. Could I, next slide, please. Back in 2016, a young black man knelt down in the beginning of a football game. You would have thinking that this was Pearl Harbor 2.0. People were quite furious about what he did. They said he was dishonoring the flag and the national anthem. And what he was trying to do was, being that he was someone who was noticed in the community, he wanted people to see that, maybe talk to him about what was going on in his community. The fact that the schools were less than second class, that there was a lot of brutality going on, that there was homing problems. And that's what the kneeling was about. But no, they took it to be about the flag and about the national anthem. What really hurt was my friends, whether they were here in Florida, which was probably even worse, but even those that were in Minnesota, it got so bad, we just stopped speaking to each other over someone kneeling. This is a Christian act of going down on one knee. If I remember my history well, there were some men that got on a boat that didn't belong to them and took tea that they hadn't bought and they threw it off into the water. And they call that the Boston Tea Party. The people just recently stormed the Capitol. They call that a protest. And someone that kneels, they get all upset and want football to be thrown out of the system. Well, I figured that the one way I could handle this, I was going to Toastmasters and I was going to give them a little speech on what had happened. And I did, and I explained what it was all about, and that he was trying to get people to focus on what was in his community. I thought I did a good job. The following week, boy, did I get myself in trouble. You see, there was a young lady who was a veteran. She had been in the Navy for over 20 years. And she got up and gave a speech and she said, "I've been in the Navy for over 20 years. I have worn that uniform. I would have died for that uniform, the flag and that national anthem. My father was an officer in the Army, and he fought in World War II, wearing that uniform and under that flag. And when he died, they draped a flag over his casket. And when they were lowering it, they folded it and she went down in a kneeling process and pretended she was handing it to her mother. There wasn't a dry eye in the place, but I was furious. Why was I so furious? I was livid. Because you see, what she didn't realize is that my father, this is my dad and my mom. My father fought in that same war, in that same uniform, but he had to fight in a segregated unit. When he came home, they dropped him off at a base in the South, and he had to come home by bus. But he had to sit in the back of the bus in that uniform under that flag. When he stopped on the way home to eat, he couldn't eat at the restaurants. He had to go in the back in the picnic tables with his uniform on under the flag. When he got back home, he realized that there was the GI Bill. So there were a number of developers building new homes for returning GIs. He was told, don't even apply. There was money for him to go to college, and he wanted to apply, but none of the colleges would accept him. Employers were giving incentives to hire GIs when they got back. He never got hired. But he did get a chance to work for the government anyway, in the Treasury Department. Dad was a cool guy. Worked his way up. He became a U.S. Marshal at one point for years. He used to go in undercover work. He had more than 4 or 5 passports to get him in and out of countries quickly. He was the first one to teach, forget their name, the people that guard the airplanes, the air marshals, thank you. He was the first one to train the air marshals. He also was in the Secret Service at one point and guarded President Kennedy's limo. By the time he left the government, he was Assistant Director of Customs. He then went on to be the head security for the Philadelphia airport. He was a really cool guy. And when he died, there was a motorcade through Philadelphia, motorcycles, police vehicles, lights flashing. At the cemetery, there was a 21-gun salute, and that flag that draped his casket. That too was folded, and an officer handed it to my mother. I'd like to end with a short story that's not mine. I'm going to read it. Now, I'm smiling because I'm hoping that Kirtland is smiling on me because he knows how hard it is for me to read. So here we go. The next slide, please. The old grandfather said to his grandson, "Let me tell you a story. I too at times have felt great hate for those who have taken so much with no sorrow for what they do. But hate wears you down, and hate does not hurt your enemy. Hate is like taking poison and wishing your enemy would die. I have struggled with these feelings many times. It is if there were 2 wolves inside me. One wolf is good and does no harm. He lives in harmony with all around him and does not make offense when there is no offense, especially when it wasn't intended. He will only fight when it is right to do so and in the right way. But the other wolf is full of anger. The littlest thing will set him into a fit of temper. He fights everyone all the time for no reason. He cannot think because his anger and his hate are so great. It is a helpless anger because anger will change nothing. Sometimes it is hard to live with these two wolves. It is hard to live with these two wolves in me because both of the wolves try to dominate my spirit. The little boy intensely looked into his grandfather's eyes and asked, "Which wolf will win, grandfather?" The grandfather said, "The one I feed."